Hi guys, welcome back to Two Worlds Collide podcast. On today's episode, we have Andrew Carpenter, someone who has dedicated his career to fighting some of the worst crimes imaginable. The Herald Sun calls him the man most hated by Australian child sex offenders. Andrew Carpenter is the leading lawyer tackling child abuse cases head-on. The numbers are shocking. On some days, over 50% of cases in the South Australian District Court are related to child sexual abuse. And it doesn't stop there. Every single day, 500,000 streams of child exploitation material are flooding into Australia, consumed by predators who should be locked away. Andrew isn't just exposing the truth, he's fighting for real change. One of the most powerful moves he's pushing for, allocating predators' superannuation to their victims. A brilliant, long overdue idea that could finally bring some justice to survivors. This episode doesn't shy away from the hard truths. It's raw, it's real, and it's a conversation that Australia needs to have. I hope you guys enjoy. All right, you ready to roll?
Always.
Mate, Andrew Carpenter, welcome to Two Worlds Collide podcast. How you going?
Good, mate. Thank you for having me. It's a bit of a, I haven't served, but hopefully I can give your viewers a bit of an insight of the state of abuse in Australia.
Mate, definitely. And, we were just talking off air before of like why I'm so passionate about this and why I want to have you on the podcast because, you talk to any of my military mates, any of the guys that we've been overseas with and have had stuff happen to us overseas and, like guys dying and IED blasts and stuff like that, you can, like, from a soldier's point of view, we can live with that because one, everyone wanted to be there. Like you were almost lucky to go over Afghanistan if you're in the army and into the roles that we're in. And two, it was a soldier's job. Like that was our job to go over there and get in amongst it. But the things that we've seen over there that happen to kids, like that's the sort of shit that can stay with you and has stayed with me personally and has stayed with plenty of guys from the military that have done trips. And what actually amazes me and some of the stuff that you're reporting on is it's not happening in these countries that we never get to see. It's happening here at home, which is hugely concerning. So I do want to get onto that, but I first want to get onto you as a lawyer. So maybe just talk me through why you want to become a lawyer, and then in particular, what has driven you to really start to highlight these child sexual abuses against kids in South Australia?
I mean, the progression into law was because I hated being an accountant. Yeah. I think I haven't met too many happy accountants in my life, but I didn't get the grades for law at uni, and I started at Uni SA, and it was actually one of my accounting teachers actually said to me, the uni's starting a law program, you should give it a crack. You'd be right up your field. And I was working in an accounting firm, and at the age where all my friends were 21, 22 and graduating and getting cars and traveling, I was like, well, I kind of don't want to spend another 2 or 3 years at uni, but worked at an accounting firm and just went, no, this isn't for me. So went into law and enjoyed it, got a job, and one of the first days at the first firm that I started at, there was a child abuse file there. And when you're a graduate of a law firm, it's like you're the grunter of an industry. When you start, you do the medial jobs that no one else wants to do. And I got given some abuse files that people didn't want to do. And I saw how bad children were treated and how the system was stacked against them. And I wanted to start doing the best wanted to be the voice of the voiceless, the people that were overlooked. And it was an old firm that I worked at, and I didn't want to see people just have their files thrown to the back, and took it on myself and started doing abuse claims ever since. And I became passionate about it. People are shocked. It's never happened to me. I was never abused as a child. I grew up with an amazing single mum with a sister, and my grandma helped us out and didn't experience any sexual abuse or anything like that in my life. But I just saw how unfairly victim survivors were treated, and how the conviction rates were abhorrent, how it was difficult for them to get justice. And I've been doing law for about 13 years now, and specialising in this field, and settled hundreds of cases and ruined a lot of offenders' lives.
Is it also a part of the innocence of a child that attracts you to helping them out so much?
To me, it's the fact that you see the offenders that commit crimes. And I mean, the conviction rate is 0.003% for child sexual abuse. It's
bullshit.
It's for every 1,000 reports, 100 go to the police. So of every 1,000 reports, 100 investigated by police, 6 get convicted, and 3 get overturned on appeal.
Wow.
So 3 in 1,000. And I saw how hard it was for people to get justice that way, and how the system basically just chewed them out and spat them out. In the civil sphere, which I do, is I can go after offenders even if they aren't criminally convicted. So the best example is O.J. Simpson. He got found not guilty of murder of his ex-wife and I think a waiter at a restaurant that simply dropped home, I think it was her keys or glasses that just dropped it off. But when he got sued, the civil jurisdiction, which is balance of probabilities, not beyond reasonable doubt, the court said or held that we find that you were liable for the death. So the abhorrent conviction rate dissuades a lot of people from suing. But I started making a career in going after the offenders and really trying to get the justice that victim survivors deserve. Because if the police can't investigate and there's not a conviction, it's not a sign for someone not to go ahead, because the average time frame it takes to report is 29.4 years after the fact.
Wow.
And so you think by that time, I couldn't remember what I was doing 29 years ago.
Yeah.
At best, people say, I was abused by this person. It was summer because I would have been wearing my summer uniform. Don't know what day of the week. Don't know what happened. So beyond reasonable doubt, it's difficult to do that without contemporaneous evidence. But on the balance of probabilities, based on psych reports, testimony, cross-examination, a court will find in favour of, well, we believe this actually did happen. So it's still a finding of the court.
Yeah, okay, that's very interesting. So they could get let off in the courts, but then in a civil court they could get done. Does that mean they could potentially spend time in jail, or is that just a financial thing?
It's just a financial. And so look at Bruce Lerman, for instance. The criminal charges against Brittany Lerman were dropped, but when he sued for defamation, the federal court, I think Justice Bazanko, found that I find that you raped Miss Higgins. But I started seeing what offenders do, and whenever an offender is charged, what they do is they sell their assets, they pump it into a partner's name or put it in superannuation, defend the charge. When they're found not guilty, the victim survivors try to sue them, and they wave a white flag and say, I've got nothing, you can't touch me. So back in 2020, I started a law change called Super for Survivors, which was aimed at enabling victim survivors to go after the superannuation of offenders.
Nice.
Because if you've worked since 1987, you've bound to have some form of superannuation. And the nexus for this was there was a magistrate called Peter Liddy in South Australia who was the worst sex offender this state has ever seen. He was a magistrate for 25 years, and the whole time he was abusing children. Now, when he went to prison in 2001, despite having a multi-million-dollar home and millions of dollars in superannuation, he was legally able to capitulate all his assets. And then when his victim survivors tried to sue him, he waved a white flag, said, I've got nothing. Yet he's been sitting in prison on a multi-million-dollar superannuation package for the past 24 years, and the victim survivors couldn't touch it. In fact, it was you, me, and the other taxpayers of the state that had to indemnify him for his crimes by victims of crime payments. And that's what happens. It's the redress scheme is effectively taxpayers meeting the compensation of institutions, state government, churches, private individuals, where I'm saying, no, it shouldn't be up for us. It should be these individuals who are hiding assets and offending should be liable for it, because this isn't a problem you can arrest out of. 2023, the Australian maltreatment study showed that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday. Whoa. And that's in Australia.
Wow.
And for an average classroom of 30 children, that's statistically 8 children, 3 boys and 5 girls in that classroom will be sexually abused before their 18th birthday.
Yeah, okay, wow. So sexually abused from adults.
And
wow.
It's people think it's this big strange danger thing, but it's 80% incestual, and 92% of offenders are known to the victim survivors.
Wow.
So you're more likely to be abused sexually in your home than you are at a nightclub. And look at the domestic violence rates. We saw last year all the protests, and rightfully so, of domestic violence, but domestic violence in 1 in 6 women. So you're twice as likely to be sexually abused as a child than you are to be domestically assaulted as an adult female.
Yeah, right. Do we know the demographics of the assaulters? Like, are they Caucasian older men? Are they some immigrants? Do we know?
It's mainly married white middle-aged men.
Wow.
So I've I've
what the fuck is wrong with us?
In 13 years of this, I've done 2 claims against females, and the rest are mainly fathers, stepfathers, uncles, grandfathers, godfathers, teachers is a big one. But the fact that it's constantly about a family member, and I've had one in New South Wales where he abused all 3 of his daughters, and his wife stood by him even though he pled guilty to abusing the children. And when I started suing him on behalf of the daughter, his wife called me and said, "I hope someone rapes your children for what you're doing to my husband." Oh. And I'm like, your husband pled guilty to abusing your 3 daughters and you're standing by him.
Yeah, that's disgusting. Absolutely disgusting. It absolutely boils my blood just to hear this stuff. But at the same time, these things need to be spoken about, and they need to be spoken about more often, because if they just get continuously put on the side, and the crazy thing is, you never really hear this stuff in the media, which is the main problem. Like, if the media started reporting on this more often, then I think the general public would get angrier and angrier, and then have to do something about it.
Well, they can't, because under the Evidence Act, if you identify the offender, if it identifies the victim survivor, you can't report it. So because of the stats of only 80% incestual, 92% known, if you simply say, Bob Smith abused his neighbour, or Fred Smith abused his daughter, it can identify that. And so it was January 2024, I started going, right, well, I know how bad it is. How can I use a platform to actually show people how bad it is? And so what I'd started doing is every week I'd go through the District Court of South Australian lists, and I'd list every week, every Friday afternoon on my Instagram page, Andrew Carpenter Solicitor. I do a video called The Numbers Don't Lie, and I highlight the percentages of matters in the District Court. And I'll read up last week, because last week was probably one of the worst ones we've had in the 12 months since I'm doing this. So last week, it was obviously a public holiday on the Monday. On Tuesday, 51.85% of all matters in the District Court of South Australia were related to child sexual abuse. Wednesday was 18.75%. Thursday was 20.59%, and Friday was 22.38%.
So probably averaging around 35 to 40%.
Exactly. And wow. I started doing that video to show people how bad it actually was. And when people started looking at those videos, they were like, what? We are in the grips of a child abuse epidemic in not only South Australia, but Australia. So I only do the stats for South Australia, because we're the only state or territory in the country that actually highlights the name of the offender and the charges.
Well, that's good at least.
Yeah, it's good at least. Yeah. But it's we're the city of churches, and we're starting to look like the city of offenders as well.
Yeah. And now, look, I definitely want to keep rolling with the South Australia stuff and what you're doing here, but I want to talk about some stuff globally as well.
Sure.
That people might not know about. Now, look, I'm not taking a... look, I probably am. But, the Biden-Harris administration had the open border policy where 300,000 kids were trafficked or taken across the border, and they don't know where they are. Mm-hmm. Now, let's just say 10%, right? 10% of those kids went into sex trafficking rings or some type of forced labour. That's still 30,000 kids.
Yeah.
And that is 30,000 too much. And for an administration not to know where them 300,000 kids gone or went over that 4-year period is mind-blowing, because kids are just so innocent, and they just can't defend themselves on that type of level. So to know that that's happening in America, and then to hear the cases that's happening in Australia as well, blows my mind. Now, you gave me a point that I already knew about, but I want you to repeat again in regards to us being one of the main consumers of child pornography. Can you just highlight those numbers and globally as well? Yep.
So Australia is the 3rd highest consumer of live child abuse material in the world. The US is number 1. I think their population is about 300 million. UK is 2, and they're about 100 million, and we're 26 million at 3. This isn't per capita. This is actual streams. So there's 500,000 live streams of child sexual abuse material from Asia streamed into Australia every day.
Wow.
And so what offenders are doing now is they're actually paying individuals over in Southeast Asia. They're paying them a few dollars here and there, and they're actually getting children abused over Skype, video calls, and they're telling the offenders exactly what to do, and people are actually paying for this. and that way they're not going to get their house raided and find millions of images or millions of videos. They're just going to pay for their live stream for the day, and off they go. And you think that, when we're less than 10% of the population of America, are almost on par with them.
That is disgusting.
It's deplorable. And the thing with me is, like, say my mum's almost 70, and I had to teach. She took her first photo the other day and sent it to me on her iPhone, but I'm seeing offenders in their 70s, 80s actually accessing the dark web, and I don't know any normal person that would know how to access the dark web. I wouldn't even know where to start to do that. But people that grow up in the generation without technology, they're then going to the lengths of finding this material. And you see, for instance, say if you see a biker getting arrested, the first thing they do is the police have got out a press release. They're showing their Ferrari and their Harleys getting taken off in a pickup truck and saying, look what we've done, and taking their assets. But a lot of the offenders are either single or married men that they're not in high-paying jobs, yet they're able to afford 1 or 2 overseas holidays a year. They're affording brand new cars because these individuals are actually using abuse material as currency. So they're selling it to people overseas, and they're monetizing it, and they're weaponizing it. But you're never seeing any offenders getting arrested or their assets getting taken. And the deterrence isn't really doing anything at the moment. Yeah,
and I was having this discussion with one of my friends, X2 Commando Special Forces guy. The episode is called John Dixon, if anyone wants to go back and listen to it. He talks about having friends of friends that work in the arena of liberating kids all over the world, and it's through this business called Lantern Rescue. I've actually contacted them for a podcast, and they've gotten back to me, so it looks like I'll be organising that, which will be really, really good. But mate, he was telling me some stories, and I won't tell all of them on air, but I will say a couple. Like, some of these cases in which they are liberating kids around the world. Like one was from the Philippines, and it was a 2-year-old boy, and this guy was selling his kid and letting males come in and just do what they want. And it blows my mind that was the case. But what blows my mind even more is that Australians are fucking consuming this shit.
Yeah.
And
And what these offenders are doing, like, when the rare chance that they are getting convicted, they're going to Mount Gambier or Port Lincoln, which is just jails full of offenders. And during there, they're telling you how to hide assets, and they're even going to the lengths of, if you go down to this one suburb in Adelaide and pay this woman $50, you'll have, half an hour alone with a daughter and things like that. But it was weird a while ago that I always thought that child sex offenders were hated in prison by virtue of their crime. But it's not. It's because statistically, most people in prisons have been abused as a child. And so child abuse basically leads to people using drugs at an early age to mask the offending, turning to alcohol, then turning to theft to support their addiction, and then engaging in more high-end crimes to continue to fund it. And so you're seeing that child sexual abuse is normally the precipitating factor for a lot of people going off the deep end.
It's sad that they got caught up in a world like that, but it's also sad that there's some type of safe haven in prisons for these people, because years ago, mate, it wasn't like that.
Oh, and it's the conviction rate, and that's why I started the super change, because I'm like, if you can't arrest out of, why can't you deter? And I did a chat at a Australian Law Council in Melbourne. They invited myself and Grace Tame to go and then have a chat. And the night before, I was thinking, all right, well, how can I use some real life statistics to try and prove my point? And to me, I've always said the most reliable news source in the world is Sportsbet. And so I went on Sportsbet, and I've said to people, look, this is how ridiculous the odds are. So you're 99.997% likely to get away with abusing a child based on the reporting statistics. The closest odds on Sportsbet when I did that was Pauline Hanson and Bob Katter paying 100-1 to become the next Prime Minister of Australia. Yeah, and people laughed and said that'll never happen. I'm like, that's exactly my point.
Yeah,
that's how unlikely it is for them to be Prime Ministers, but that's how unlikely it is for someone to get convicted of this. So I'd probably say out of the hundreds and hundreds of child abuse matters I've done, maybe 10 have been against convicted offenders. And the disconnect of offenders is astounding. I had one guy here, he adopted a girl at 6 weeks old. He started abusing her from when she remembers, from 2.5 to 16. The worst abuse you can ever imagine. Like, she needed reconstructive surgery when she's older. So he got convicted. During the civil trial, he didn't take an active part on it, but he wanted to be heard on one point. So won the trial, got her awarded judgment, and he had a freehold house that he transferred to his son for $20,000 the day before he got in prison. So we got that set aside. And then he asked the judge to call on one day, and the judge was reading out and talking about the horrific stuff he did to his daughter. And then he's like, the only thing I want to say is what's going to happen to my couch and my TV in my house.
Get the fuck out of here.
And the judge and I just looked at each other and went...
Is that what he said?
All he cared about was his new couch and his new TV that he bought before he went to jail.
Shit.
And I'm thinking the level of disconnect with this is that, again, he's in prison, he's having his tea and biscuits, and there was another offender that I got. He was a St. Ignatius teacher called Hamra, and he's in prison for life. He was able to sell all his assets and try and depocket all his clients. There's been multiple people that have sued him over the years. There's also another person I've sued on behalf of people. We got a freezing order against him, basically freezing his assets. Because we can't touch superannuation, this offender is in prison the rest of his life, and he's able to access parts of his super. So he can legally capitulate $700,000 in super all through prison, and when he gets out, or if he dies, his victim survivors can't touch it.
So the act that you're trying to bring in, they can obviously, the victims can obviously have, they can get a bit of that super. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's the law change. I've always said it's a no-brainer. It's effectively aimed at deterring people. So by saying if you offend, you're going to lose everything you've worked for. It's going to adequately compensate victim survivors, because at the moment it's you and I, the taxpayer, meeting the cost of these victim survivors. So many of them that I deal with never can work, never will work, can't finish school, can't afford anything. So the government or the taxpayers paying their Centrelink, PBS, Medicare, rent assistance, everything, while the victim survivors are living off their super comfortably. And I'm trying to say, look, well, we're going to deter people. It's not going to cost the taxpayer a cent. And I mean, the cost of, well, in 2016 there was a study by Brave Hearts, which is I think they're based in Queensland. It's a child abuse foundation. Back in 2016, they said that the annual cost of child sexual abuse to the Australian taxpayer is $30.1 billion a year.
Whoa!
And if you think the national debt is $750 billion, and out of all the offenders that I've dealt with, if they're convicted and they go to jail, they're not going to pay a cent. I had one guy in Adelaide. He abused his goddaughter, and he was doing it in public, so people actually saw him do it. And when we went to sue him, his words were, "I'd rather pay a QC 50 grand a day than give that girl a cent because she ruined my life."
Get the fuck out of here.
And so he tried to put it on her. She was 14 at the time. He was abusing her. There was 4 witnesses that saw it happening. And when we went to sue him, he did that. And he goes, "Well, I'll just sell my house and you won't get a cent." I'm like, okay, well, you know, back then we had to settle, but he had about $3 or $4 million in super because he was a successful businessman. And
Shit.
yet she couldn't touch that. And these offenders are simply going, well, you can't touch me, you're not going to get a cent. And this law change is something as simple as putting 6 words in the Bankruptcy Act. Liberals support it, the Greens support it, which is weird because the Greens were against the National Sex Offender Registry, but yet they support my change. But the Labor government's against it. The Labor government said we're not going to touch employee entitlements of super, but I'm like, well, you have. The Labor in 2023, they announced to meet a $1.2 billion shortfall in the aged care sector, they started taxing anyone that had more than $3 million in super 30%.
Yeah.
So what they were effectively saying is you'd much rather tax hard-working Australians and go after the super of offenders.
I can't believe they're worried about pedophiles fucking supers over average Australians.
What one minister said was, well, the taxpayer is going to have to cover the cost of offender for life. And I said, no, you're covering the pension from 67 to life. An average lifespan in Australia is, I think, 82. So effectively, 15, 16 years tops. Yet currently, you're covering the cost of an 18-year-old for life. And And if an 18-year-old gets a big settlement, they can afford treatment, they can go to rehab and come out the other side and hopefully work. But unless we start showing that there's a greater deterrence on this, it's not going to change. And I've had so much support behind the super campaign, and I'm banging my head in the wall that 5 years later it hasn't changed, it hasn't been implemented. The Labor said they'll announce it for convicted offenders, but I said, but that's 0.003% of the people
nothing.
report. That's 3 out of 1,000 that report. Like, there's another stat about 97% of rapists will not see the inside of a jail cell.
Really?
And so one member of parliament said to me, well, if we implement this change for child sexual abuse, why shouldn't we implement it with every other crimes? And I said, well, the High Court's found that this is a standalone crime, and child sexual abuse is the only crime that has no legal justification. It's like adult sexual, say adult rape, consent can be revoked halfway through the act, but a child cannot consent. Murder, for instance, you can get charged with murder if it's excessive self-defense or self-defense of another. Drink driving, you can, if your friend falls over and cracks their head open and you're 2 hours away from a hospital, if you're drunk and get in a car and flog at the hospital, you can say, I had to go and save my friend's life. But there is no legal justification for sexually abusing a child. And the closest explanation I've ever heard from an offender, which still it makes me sick saying it, he said, but she came on to me. And I'm like, this girl was 7 years old. Like,
how does a 7-year-old come on to a fucking grown adult? It's
insane. And so there's no rhyme or reason why this change should be implemented. Because if you think, imagine if 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys were murdered, or 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys were drug addicts. Imagine how quickly it would change.
Yeah.
But this is not a topic that government ministers want to actually take on, because it's a turn the channel issue. Like,
people don't want to talk about it.
My wife hates seeing me on TV talking about this stuff. Yeah, we've got young children, and people with children just want to turn a blind eye. But
mate, they do. I mean, just sorry to jump in. When I did air that episode with my friend and we spoke about child trafficking around the world, I did have friends call me and say, mate, that was really tough to listen to. Like, because I have kids, so it is really, really hard for people to engage in this discussion, but people need to do it. People have to listen to this, and we have to force some type of change. Otherwise, you were talking about murder rates before. Like, what happens if it was 1 in 2, or kids, X amount of kids getting murdered? Like, I put it like this: when a kid does get sexually abused, and for quite some time, when you're pretty much murdering them, or you're murdering their mind, like, you are destroying them for the rest of their life.
It's a life sentence. There's you look at the offenders that the rare few that get prison sentences. They can get suspended sentences. They can get home detention. They can get out for early release and get on parole. But for a victim survivor, there's no suspended sentence for your trauma. There's no early release. There's no getting that out of your head. It's something that people are scarred with for life.
Yeah, and this trauma, I've spoken about trauma a lot on my podcast with guys with PTSD. It gets passed down through generations as well. So, that trauma infect on that person, if that little girl or that little boy ends up having kids, that trauma can flow on through generations and generations.
And most of the people that I've dealt with, when they come forward, it's because they have children of their own, and they go, I don't want my child to go through this. And a lot of the time with matters where they are denied and it's looking like it's going to court, I take statements from the parents. And so what would happen with the parents is they'll turn around and say, well, we knew something was wrong. We knew when you were 16, like, you just completely changed overnight one day. And when you interview them, they go, oh my God, like, we thought there was a weekend in winter of 2012 where she completely changed, and we always thought something would happen, and they can pinpoint the exact moment. And one of the big things is I never talk in detail graphically about the acts. I always try and tell people the warning signs. And so one of the biggest ones is, say, if you have a child that is enamored by a coach, and they're their favourite person in the world. They're always so excited to see him. It's the sport's their favourite thing in the world. And one day there is a game on. They just, I don't want to go. don't want to see that coach, don't want to do anything. Most parents go, oh, okay, well that's, they'll probably change their opinion on sport, but that's a warning sign. It's if you've got 3 or 4 young children and a godfather is always, or a godfather, an uncle or a relative is always spoiling one over the others and asking for alone time with them, that's another warning sign. Because the thing with child abuse, it's not like murder or an assault where it can be spur of the moment. You don't have a neighbour that you just let into your kid's house and let them stay the night at their house. The grooming takes a long time to gain the trust of the family and then to abuse that trust.
Yeah, mate, it's completely disgusting. What's also more disgusting as well, I was doing some research on this, and I was just scrolling through X platform, formerly Twitter, and I seen something come up there of this lady saying that we got to stand away from the word pedophile and we've got to start using the word minor attracted person. Like, that is fucking disgusting. And she went on to say that people of age, they can't help who they're attracted to. And I'm like, that is the biggest load of horse shit I've ever fucking heard in my life. And it made me almost want to jump in the screen and like just strangle her, because it's disgusting.
The funny thing is, like, a pedophile is defined as a person who's sexually attracted to a child, and a minor attracted person is someone that's attracted to a person. And I hate the rebranding of that. It's, you're a sex offender against a child, but there have been people that have actually come out and said, look, there needs to be specialised centres or hotlines to actually call for people that are thinking of offending, by calling up and say, hey, look, I am a person that's attracted to children. How can I control this? But calling a minor attracted person, it's like, no, like, if you abuse a child, you're a pedophile. And you think over the years, like, we look in the 90s, for instance, everyone spoke about Michael Jackson being a creep. Everyone knew that he was a creep because he was attracted to children. You look at Elvis Presley, he met his wife when she was 13, married her at 15. R. Kelly married Aaliyah when she was 15. And I remember I was watching the MTV movie Awards. This would have been about maybe 2001, 2002. I remember vividly because Chris Rock was hosting it. And in his opening monologue, he was cracking jokes. And he goes, oh, look, the Olsen twins are sitting in the front row, which means R. Kelly must be sitting in the back row to keep him safe. And you think people were joking about it back then, but no one ever wanted to talk about it because it's uncomfortable. You think 20 years ago we didn't talk about mental health. 15 years ago we didn't talk about suicide. 10 years ago we didn't talk about domestic violence. But we still haven't hit the pendulum where people want to come out and talk about this, because it's something people want to turn the channel away. But that's why I start my weekly videos, and I always open up. If you're a parent, grandparent, auntie, uncle, you need to know this, because
I like how you do
these
that.
are the risks. And you think at schools, like, the biggest no at schools is bringing peanuts in or bringing allergens, but it isn't until children actually learn sex ed, and I think it's early now. I think I did it when I was at primary school in the 90s, in like year 6 or something. I think they do it.
Yeah, I was probably the same.
Around like year 4 or 5 at the moment, or maybe even younger.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are actually disclosing for the first time that something happens to them when they learn in sex ed that what happened to me wasn't right. So Madeline West, she came out of her story in 2022, and she's had 40,000 notifications since then, either in person or social media, or people reaching out and saying, this happened to me.
Wow.
Because people, so when you're a child, you obviously don't know what's happening, and so offenders are using them. They're saying, this is our secret. If you tell anyone, I'll hurt you, I'll hurt your dog, hurt your family members. And they're actually rewarding them for giving them treats, and they think that, oh, this is completely normal. But once they learn what's actually happened, they go, hey, this wasn't right.
Yeah. Mate, I just want to ask you a personal question as well. Do you personally struggle, like, to look at some of these cases? Like does it have a personal effect on you sometimes?
Not as much. I tend to going, right, I'm the voice of the voiceless. I'm someone who, yes, it's messed up, all the stuff I do on a daily basis, but I've always, I go to the gym 5 nights a week religiously. Like, I'll do it when the kids are asleep, but I actually started the law change in 2020 when I actually took my son to childcare for the first time, because that's the first time it's ever gone, this is real. Like, I have a child of my own. I know how bad it is. And so that's when I started it, because I saw him sitting in the class. I've gone, I don't want this to happen to him or his friends. But I always I mean, it's a hard example to use, and it's not detracting from any of the people that come forward to report to me. But say you watch The Expendables or Terminator or something like that, or I mean, it's been 35 years since Terminator come out, so I can spoil Terminator 2 for everyone. So, at the end of the Terminator 2 Judgment Day, he dies.
Yeah,
and people, if they saw that in the cinema, they wouldn't go home and go, "Oh my God, he dies." I try and say, right, I cannot change what happened in the past. I can believe what happened, and I'll do whatever I'll move hell and high water to get the best possible outcome for a client. But clients are depending on me to be strong, to be ballsy, and I need to keep that up. And so I've always, I'm not a big drinker. Having young kids, your drinking days are over. I've never been a drug user, or I just go to the gym every night religiously. I put my podcasts on, and I try to take out all the bad stuff that I do there. I did martial arts for years, so that was always a good release. But I think the biggest thing is I saw how bad it was, and I want to do as much as I can to ensure that all the work that I do, if I can save one life or get one person to disclose, then so be it. And I started doing the weekly series because no one spoke about it. So I'm actually having people come up to me, at friend of friends or parents at school, saying, "Oh, I saw this, what you're doing, great work."
Yeah, definitely.
It's not a divisive topic, what I'm doing. It's not like, look at the most divisive things in politics we've had in the past few years. We had the referendum in '99 to become a republic. We had the Indigenous vote, the Voice of Australia. We have all things that, like, you think the next federal election is basically on a knife's edge, but this is not something in Australia that is going to dissuade people. There's going to be 99.9999% of people that are going to say stricter laws, stricter penalties against sex offenders. So. I try not to let it get to me, but I'm just making sure that I'm a bit of a stubborn prick. If I set my mind to do something, I need to see it out, and I'm not going to stop until this changes. Yeah,
well, you're a good person in my books, mate. If especially if there are people that don't want to tackle these issues, but for you to get on the front foot and do this, and then go out against it publicly as well, I think that's one of the most important things that you're doing. But I also just want to dive back to a topic that absolutely blew my mind, is Australia being a consumer of child porn. Now, off the top of my head, 350 million to 375 million in America population is, right? And then the UK is like 80 million, and then we're sitting at 27 million or something like that. So we're the third out of everywhere in the world.
Yep.
But then if you look at America has 350 million, we have 27 million. So we would probably be per capita the highest consumer of child porn in the world, Australia.
Because
that is disgusting.
It is, and it's the cost of the individuals paying young children in Southeast Asia, or not paying the children, paying the abuser. I had about maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I got contacted by the Department of Home Affairs, and they said, "Look, we've saw all the work you've been doing in the super change, and we want to float something with you. We've dedicated, I think it was a $90 million fund for an international victims of crime fund to track down individuals who have been abused overseas and to try and compensate them for their crimes." And I said, "All right, well, 2 questions. One, how can you find a 1-year-old in a village somewhere in Southeast Asia?" And they're like, "Well, we probably can't." I said, "Well, second question, who's paying for this fund?" "Oh, well, the taxpayer." I said, why aren't the offenders paying for it?"
Yeah.
"Oh, well, I'm like, where's the deterrent? Like, if you're an offender and you're streaming material, how can the police, unless they've tapped your computer or recording it or have some form of evidence? Because I'm not good with the computers. Encrypted is the one where people can't find, or unencrypted?
Encrypted, I think.
Encrypted. So, some video stream service, like say if you FaceTime someone, it's not recorded, it's just you both view that, and once you hang up, it's done. So people are abusing children over FaceTime, over Skype, and there's one other, I can't remember the program, there's another one, I think WhatsApp maybe?
Yeah, okay.
One of them where it's just video calls.
Yeah.
And they're abusing people over that, and they hang up and they're just like, "Oh, I'm not in possession of this anymore." But then on the flip side, you're seeing people arrested with terabytes of images, and terabytes is 1,000 gig. And I did a podcast the other week, and he said you could have like 2 or 3 weeks of solid 24/7 streaming for not even near a terabyte.
And that's how much that person had on there.
I had one guy years and years ago. He was probably in his late 60s. This is maybe 2008 or 9, late 60s. He got arrested with 360,000 images. And I remember thinking back then, like, you could buy a house if you had $1 for everyone. And he was, again, he was in his late 60s, wasn't tech savvy. He saved them all on USBs. And you think, mate, you're going to the ends of the world to find this stuff. And, you see that people in the news, and, people probably doubt that we're the third highest consumer, but you look at someone in the news and we're getting arrested. It's not they're arrested with 10 images. They're arrested with hundreds of thousands or millions of videos. There was a guy called Jad Brooker. He was actually arrested with something like 1.2 million images. And you think, how could you get that many? And it wasn't him abusing children in all of those images. He was in some, but he was actually trading material for people around the world.
Yuck.
And you think how easy it would be for police to infiltrate these domains and to clear them up. But again, it's the risk of getting caught. And I've always said, like, the government is more concerned of preventing 2 bikies from going to a pub than they are of 100 pedophiles going to a Wiggles concert.
Yeah.
You see there was 3 bikies, I think maybe 6 months ago, arrested. One was in a chicken shop, and the other one walked in, saw him, I don't know if he walked past or was with them, but walked in and said hello, had a chat. Cops drove past, saw 2 bikies in the same place at the same time, arrested both of them.
Unreal.
But, you can go to a Wiggles concert as a sex offender and...
No dramas.
No dramas.
Disgusting. Man, I've got some nieces and nephews as well, and mate, it just I would, if anything ever happened to them, I would gladly go back to my military days, and I'd probably be wearing an orange jumpsuit.
I had someone a while ago said to me, what would you do if someone abused your children? Would you call the police? I said, no, I'd call SA Power Networks. And they said, why? I said, because I need to know where to dig a hole. Yeah. And it's, one of the big things against the sex offender registry from the state Labor government was that it's going to promote vigilantism. Now, I've been around law for 13 years now, and I've only ever seen one act of vigilantism against a sex offender, and that was when he was leaving court, and he was probably about 6'3", about 140 kilos of just round. And the mother of one of his many victims, who was a childcare teacher, followed him from the district court to the Central Markets car park, which is maybe about a 300-metre walk, the whole time just punching him. And he wasn't hurt. And I said to a minister back then, I said, look, well, if you're concerned about vigilante behaviour, how many parents have been charged with harming an offender? How many have been charged with murder? I can't think of any in Australian legal history. And this isn't a thing of what we're trying to say for the sex offender registry is, you want to know, Bob Smith next door, is he a sex offender? It would be a matter of, how many registered sex offenders are there within a 3-kilometre radius of me? Are there, if I go to this playground, is there any within 500 metres? And one other big issue is you look at now with the blended families at the moment, where someone's divorced in their 30s with 3 young kids, meets another guy that why can't they go to a police station and say, this guy's about to move in with me and my children, can I just please do a search? Here's a signed authority from him saying I'm allowed to access a search on him. I just don't get the vigilante issue, but this is a thing where, again, deterrence. Throw everything at possible. If you offend against a child, you'll lose your assets and you'll be forever known as a sex offender. Yeah,
it's almost like and I'm sure the government's not doing this, but it's almost like there's a certain amount of protection they need to have for that person, which just blows my mind. Like, if you do anything like that, there should be, all your rights and, what defines us as a human goes out the window.
I mean, I get comments on my Instagram page all the time about, I'll share posts. There was a guy the other day, he was pled guilty of abusing 9 children, and he got released on without any jail time.
I've seen that.
And people kept saying, fire the judge should be disgusted. It's like, the judge, if the law says the judge can do this, they have to. It's the Parliament's problem. It's not. I know plenty of judges, and they wish they could give these guys life sentences, but they can't. They're bound by what the government's done.
They need to change the law, you're saying?
Exactly. Like you look what we're doing with mobile phones at the moment. There's all these detection cameras around where people are copping a $1,000 fine on the spot for touching their phone, and people don't realise that if you just physically touch your phone, that's a criminal offence. It's not using it anymore. And how many people have stopped using their phone because they're getting pinged with this?
Yeah.
This is a crime where statistically you're 99.997% likely to get away with it. So why wouldn't you start throwing everything you can at these crimes to stop it from happening?
Yeah. So why are they getting away with it so much? Is it just purely because the law isn't in place for them to be able to get pinged?
I mean, what's happening is, say you look at I've had guys that have been offending against people for 20 or 30 years, and the victims are so damaged that instead of counts of persistent sexual exploitation of a child, they'll plead guilty to, I don't know, like inappropriate touching or something like that. Look at the guy in the Queensland, the worst offender in Australian history. It was 93 children for like 1,600 counts, and I think he pled guilty to maybe 30 or 40. But then he got the largest sentence in Australian history. I think got 30-something years, and he's appealing it now for being manifestly excessive. You think you're the worst sex offender in Australian history, and you're saying that you got a record sentence and it's bad?
Yeah, that's disgusting.
Yeah, I think it's because of the passage of time. So, I'll say, for instance, the girl I spoke about before, the guy with the couch you wanted back, she got sexually abused on a daily basis between, she remembers, 2.5 and 16. But she could only recall 8 of the matters with significant particularity. So she could say it was in or about, summer of 81, I was wearing my summer school uniform. We went to a holiday park here. He did X, Y, and Z to me, where the hundreds, if not thousands of other instances, she's like, it's just a blur. So, for instance, if say they go on a family holiday and say, well, we went to Melbourne when we were 5 years old and he sexually abused me at this hotel, the police can go, right, hotel records or bank records, you went to this hotel over this week. So between the week of 4 February 2010 to 6 February 2010, at the Hyatt Regency in Melbourne, you sexually abused your daughter by doing X, Y, and Z. But if it's, it was at home, I might have been like maybe 4, 5, or 6, you can't plead that with certain particularity. But with the civil side, which I do, is say, well, when on or about 4 to 6 years old, he sexually abused daughter at a residence, and then with civil, they don't have the right to silence. They have to take a part of it.
Yeah.
So if there's concurrent criminal charges, they don't have to. But that's why people are getting greater success with civil actions instead of criminal, because the offender has to take part. And I mean, it's very hard to pull over the wool over eyes of a lawyer, an independent psychiatrist, and a judge. So I'm finding it's not like I've never come across someone where I've actually gone, I believe they're making it up. Right off the bat, when I talk to the offender, I can say, well, I can tell they're lying about this and they know it happened.
Yeah.
But it's not the kind of thing that people make up, because they're usually damaged from such an early age, and it's usually the parents going, their behaviour changed when they were 7 years old, or
it's crazy they can pinpoint it as well. Like if you go back and do them interviews, like you said before, the parents like, yeah, we actually noticed something at that age.
Yeah, and the girl I'm talking about, she did a trial shift somewhere and was raped by her potential employer, and she disclosed to her parents when she was maybe 34, 35, and the first thing was, oh my God, we knew something. You're about 16 and a half. It was, around your brother's birthday, and this changed. We thought something had happened, and a lot of the time the evidence from the parents or the siblings is vital, because they say, you completely changed.
Yeah. I mean, that is some very hard evidence there, like when they change, because that's such it's such a life-altering event as well. It happens, and if the family can say as well, and they can recall that from like the moment my daughter changed, I mean, that's the weight that's required, right, for you to believe that that's real.
And then you send people to independent psychiatrists where they diagnose them as suffering from...
Well, they have PTSD, wouldn't they?
Yeah, it's normally PTSD, generalizing anxiety, depression disorder, alcohol abuse, substance abuse. But a psychologist will sit down and they'll be like, we diagnosed with it. And they'll say, they were truthful, they gave eye contact, and independent psychiatrists wouldn't put their name to something if they believed someone was making it up.
Yeah. Man, that is so sad. Now, I want to ask you a question. You went for are you allowed to talk about the meeting that you went for the other day and got cancelled?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah. Can you tell me about that? I want to know about that.
So, I won't say the minister's name, but I was invited to a senior Labor minister's office to talk about child abuse. I got an email from this person's office. I got an invite or Outlook invite request. And so other people were invited as well. So I met them before. We had lunch. We went to the place where the minister is and tried to be as non-specific as possible. Went to the place where the minister was, and the minister's advisors came out to me and introduced themselves to everyone, and then said, "Are you Andrew Carpenter?" I said, "Yep." And they said, "You're not actually allowed to come into the meeting because you're doing too many civil actions against the state." And so, in other words, instead of being part of the solution, you're being part of the problem. And now, the fact that I'm doing probably most of the state claims against the state government, shouldn't it be a sign that I know that there's something that needs to be fixed?
Yeah.
And I'm literally telling the government with my advocacy, put me out of a job. If you don't want to hear from me, put me out of a job. And internally in the ministers, this person has denied it happening, but I've got a few witnesses that heard it, and I've got all the receipts to it. And I'm not a political person. I'm not going to drag people through. If I was a member of a party, of course I'd use as ammunition. But I just don't get why someone who's striving to make a difference is completely turfed out of an office and not even given the opportunity to speak when I've actually been invited to the building.
The one guy that is doing the most in South Australia, they couldn't put their political differences aside to hear you out on such a very important issue.
There was a date in November
last. That blows my mind.
Yeah, it's shocking. It was it's definitely put a bad taste in my mouth, and there's going to be a time where I'm going to say who it was and see what they say to that. But there was last year in November, the highest day last year was a weekday in November. I think it was a Thursday, for instance, and it was 42% of matters that day in the district court related to child sexual abuse. The leading story on the news that night was a politician saying that they tried to ban, I think it was a Hungry Jack's, from being barred within a kilometre of a high school because of the health impacts it has on young children. So Hungry Jack's, bad, record-breaking day in the courts for child sexual abuse, silence.
Man, that's crazy. And when I heard that, I did my own post on just a story, and I did a little write-up on it, and the amount of likes that it got, from me just calling out the local government on it. And again, I won't know. I didn't say who it was. I just said it was a Labor politician, and mate, a lot of people were really upset about it. Really upset.
They're meant to be serving us, and if you think that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 5 boys are being sexually abused, surely they want to do something a part of it. Like I'm doing a bunch of matters against schools where schools have known about teachers offending and have did absolutely nothing. There was one school in Adelaide that they had a teacher that continued to offend, and the teacher got arrested, charged, and the police didn't go ahead with it because they were concerned about the mental well-being of the victim survivor. And the police actually told the principal that we believe we can get a successful conviction out of this, but the victim survivor is not mentally well enough to go forward. All the school did to this teacher was said, right, well, we have to give you a warning, but you're not allowed to have any more students sleep at your house.
Get the fuck out of here.
That's all they did. And so that teacher continued to offend for another 15 years.
You're not allowed to say what school are you?
I'll tell you off air. But the fact, and the school's been all through the media. So, I mean, if you Google all the matters I'm doing at school, you'll see. But that was their reaction. And then there was an article from about 2015 where the Archbishop of the state, who was one of the teachers at the school, came out and said, I apologise, I had a kid disclosed to me and I didn't take it seriously, I should have considered it. And yet nothing. Like back in the 70s, 80s and 90s, even as late as the 90s, what principals were doing, where the rare time where a student would actually say, this teacher's offending against me, they would punish the student and they say, don't you dare ever mention this to anyone, or you're lying, how dare you. But these were principals where they've had many complaints before and they just cared about the school.
Mate, they're a part of the problem.
Exactly. Well,
they are the problem, right? In that case, they're the problem.
Look at George Pell. It came out this week that the National Redress Scheme had accepted 2 claims on behalf of children that were sexually abused by George Pell. And then through a Royal Commission, they actually found that George Pell had knowledge of offending against children and did nothing about it.
Wow.
Yet, when he dies, he gets a state funeral, even though that it was widely known what he was doing, covering it up.
That's disgusting. And then people knowing that as well and letting him do it.
Well, it's going to hopefully come to a time where all the people that had knowledge of this and didn't act start getting arrested, because there's so many people.
And so they should.
They should.
So they should. Mate, I've got a family friend that works for Family Essays, and I actually mentioned to her that you were coming on this podcast, and she didn't tell me in detail, but she told me some of the stuff with Family's Essay, that she's been working with some of these kids that have got abused, and I've had another mate reach out to me as well, mate, the same thing. And I'm normally pretty thick-skinned and I can normally take the information that they tell me, but I struggled to listen to it.
Well, last year in child protection, 42 young women or young girls in South Australia fell pregnant last year when they're under the protection of the minister. So these are 42 girls.
Get the fuck out of
in
here.
state care fell pregnant.
Wow.
And yet there's been no arrests.
No media.
There was it came out in a report from I think it was the general report of the Minister for Child Protection, and thank God, Liberal government have been trying to push for the past, I think, year or two to try and get a standalone Minister for Child Protection, because before, a few weeks ago, the Minister for Child Protection was also the Minister for Sports and Recreation. So you had the person who's meant to be ensuring, or had the portfolio of protecting children, trying to gather round to Adelaide, trying to bring Katy Perry here and all sorts of things like that. And this is something, if the stats are this bad, it needs a standalone minister. It's not something that you can do. It's not a shared portfolio issue. It's the fact that if you're protecting the most vulnerable, it should be on the forefront of your mind, especially where there's been. I've done matters have had inquests by Families SA where I had the Hilliard triple murder. I worked on that one where there was 2 years of complaints by individuals about these 2 young children who were murdered by their mother's new boyfriend, and the department should have taken the children away. They had over a 2-year period, they had multiple instances where it warranted immediate removal of the children, and yet the kids were still stuck in their care and they end up being murdered whilst DCP's knocking on the door.
Yuck.
And so
that's a massive failure.
I've had matters where children have been reported to being abused and put back in the care of the abuser. It's
being taken back to the person that abused them.
Yep. So they came out and said, this person's sexually abusing me. They did investigation, said, oh no, we don't find it. And they put them back in the care and they kept being abused.
Wow.
And so this is the kind of shit that I'm dealing with all the time, where I'm looking at this, and this isn't. These matters aren't from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Like I had one guy in the Kadena Memorial School, and his offending stopped in 2022, and there was potentially 50 kids he abused over there after the school knew that he was communicating with students via Snapchat. Nothing happened. Not fired. Not even a warning.
Not even fired.
No,
not even a warning.
That you look at the worst sex offender in Australia, the Queensland childcare worker. There was a woman about 5 years ago, I think it was. She walked in a room and saw him kissing a child, and she went to the heads up and called the police and said, "I walked in and saw this guy kissing a child." police didn't investigate it. The centre didn't investigate it. And then when he finally got caught, she was a whistleblower, and she went to a current affair and said, I warned this school. So I think it was Anglicare. I warned the institution that he was abusing people. And I've done plenty of current affair stories, and they always say, look, well, if you want us to do a story, we need proof of what's happening. She gave them the email that she sent the centre and said, here's my email saying I've complained about this guy. A current affair ran the story. She got a knock on the door a few days later. She had a strike force come and search her house, and she got charged with computer hacking by simply showing to the media, here's proof that I actually reported this guy. She went to a criminal trial. She got found not guilty. And so instead of the police setting a task force to this guy who she reported catching kissing a child, they got sent to her house. And if the police acted 5 years ago, they would have looked at this guy's computer, his phone, and found all these images of him abusing children, and it would have stopped many other kids from abusing.
Also, way to put off anyone that ever wants to report anything about child sexual abuse again.
Exactly.
They're going to get their fucking house raided on it.
Yeah,
that is deplorable. It was the police.
The institution were pushing it hard, and there was no apology from the institution, or thank you so much for coming out and reporting this offender and saving all this.
Your house. Yeah. Jesus.
And that's in November last year, there was a High Court decision that came down that said that institutions are no longer vicariously liable for the acts of offenders. So the acts of volunteers. So what that effectively means is that anyone that was sexually abused by a scout leader, a priest, a parishioner, or a sporting coach that's not in a paid position, the institutions are not liable. So that's going to fall back on the taxpayers. So again, churches are worth trillions of dollars. They're now putting all their sins onto the taxpayer. And as soon as I heard that change, I got straight on the phone and I had a meeting with the head of the Federal Greens, and I met with the South Australian Parliament here, and I said, right, well, you need to legislate around this, because until you do so, all these victim survivors are going to not get the redress they deserve. And it got to the point where institutions that previously in court documents admitted to having members abuse children and admitted it happening, they retracted all their defences and going, right, well, the High Court has said that we're not liable, so too bad, we're not offering you a cent.
That's wild.
And so as soon as that's happened, I've got on to get that changed. And I mean, I got called by the Herald Sun about 3 years ago. I got called the man most hated by Australian child sex offenders. And as soon as I heard the vicarious liability thing, I've gone, you know what? Kind of be the man. I want to be the man most hated by institutions. So
yeah,
why not try and change this as well?
Yeah, I mean, mate, that's a title that I would love to have as well.
Besides Dad, it's the best title.
Yeah, that's cool. That's very cool. And one of the things that brought me to, this type of work was, like my stuff in Afghanistan, the stuff I witnessed to kids over there. Some of the discussions I've had with my friends that are, all friends of friends that are working in this field to liberate kids, but. Man, I also watched a movie called Sound of Freedom. Have you seen that movie?
Yeah, I've heard of it. I haven't seen it yet. I'm trying to avoid the amount of child abuse matters I do outside of work hours.
Yeah, mate, it is a really, really tough one to watch. And the crazy thing was, the only time I watched it was I was flying from Adelaide to Europe, and I watched it on Emirates flight, because you just could not find it in any... movie theatre.
It was an independent release, I'm pretty sure. So.
Yeah. So, you couldn't find it anywhere. But, I always say to people as well, get on and watch that, because it follows a real story of a real guy working in Mexico with kids getting trafficked across the border and that type of stuff. And mate, it breaks your heart. And, like I've said before on the start of this podcast, is the wildest thing is that it's happening right here in Australia.
And the one thing I don't get is, you look at the number one podcast in the world are crime podcasts, and you look at there's a show called The First 48, which I love. It's about statistically, after the first 48 hours of a murder, every day it's 50% drop of likely to solve the murder. Mm-hmm. And as part of that show, they show dead bodies, blood splatter, all this kind of stuff, and people can watch that. But the second you say a child's been abused, I don't want to talk about it. But it's a reality we face. It's an uncomfortable truth that it's happening. And, you think if you've got a child at school, look in the class. Next time you go and drop your kids off, look in the class and just choose 3 boys and 5 girls and be like, wow, that's a real world statistic of the ones that might be being abused. And people don't want to hear about it. They love hearing all kinds of different drama, or they love the like serial killer episodes and movies and things like that. But they don't want to hear about this. And I'm trying to have the uncomfortable conversation that people don't want to have, and try to say this is something that you need to look into and need to be vigilant of. And you look at years ago, there was offenders. They were actually going to SACAP, which is like it's like an administrative tribunal where people were convicted of sexually abusing children, and they were going to get orders to basically say they could work with children, even though they were convicted sex offenders. And the only law change that I've seen in the past few years is actually something that might deter people. Is I think the state Labor government brought in something where you cannot, if you're a convicted sex offender, you cannot work somewhere where it's frequented by children. So fast foods, playground cafes, things like that. But all these law changes people are doing are after the fact. There's an amazing law change by Harrison and Jared, guys in New South Wales, called Your Reference Ain't Relevant, where what they're trying to do is try to abolish good character references from sentences for convicted offenders. Because what happens is people are put through the ring on the trial, and when their offender is convicted, they get all kinds of people coming out and giving good character references, saying how much of a great bloke they are. And there was one guy, it was the head of the Collingwood cheer squad, a guy called Joffa. He abused a 16-year-old, and when he was sentenced, he got 12 months home detention for sexually abusing a child. And anyone that went through COVID, all we did was home detention.
Yeah.
And as part of his sentencing, he used a good character reference from a priest. And when the priest was contacted about it, he wrote it for what he thought was a job recommendation. So you look at when George Pell died, look at the amount of high-profile people that wrote letters of recommendation. So when he was convicted, all the people wrote letters of recommendation saying how much of a great bloke he is. I saw one guy that actually fudged all his good character references, and they were all made-up individuals. And that was a fraud matter. And you think, well, by virtue of your offending, you're not a person of good character, so you shouldn't be able to use any good character references.
Now, since you started working in this industry, have you seen cases get worse, as in the numbers?
Yeah. So there was a study from the Sydney Morning Herald from about 2022 that said over there, cases have gone up 4.5% per year over the past 10 years for child abuse claims. And I don't know if the influx in courts now is historic or current, but it definitely shows the problem. If like on last Tuesday, half of the matters in court that day related to child abuse. Like that just screams warning bells. And I think last year the average across the year was about 25%, so a quarter of all matters a day.
Man, and that is 25% too much. It should be 0. And look, one of the things that I'm really, really worried about, if we don't get on top of it, these 25% will become 30. The next 5 or 10 years, 35. Next 5 or 10 years, 40. And then we'll just be averaging 50% days consistently. That's what I worry about if we don't jump on it.
And that's my biggest concern, is the fact that it's not a problem you can arrest out of. Like, if every person that abused a child is arrested, the courts would be completely inundated. And so, deterrence is key, and there's other ways around to prevent people from committing crimes. Like, most people don't drink and drive because they're concerned about getting caught. But how many times have you driven home on a Friday night after work, stone cold sober, and not seen any booze buses on the road? It's the fear of getting caught that is going to impact you. So
yeah, that's it.
So I'm trying to throw everything I can at this to make sure that there's going to be some change. Because unless and until people stand to lose everything, what's the risk to them?
So that's the goal for you, is to, if they do become an offender and there is a victim, to take everything from them.
Yeah, clean the super out, because it's...
I like that.
Well,
that, and they should be in prison for the rest of their life.
It should be, but it's not passing it back onto the taxpayer that way. It's actually going to give someone who can never work the ability to grow. Like have you heard of Russell Manser?
No.
So I spoke at Russell Manser's funeral, and he was he was abused when he was 16. He became an influencer or a TikTok star, and he was highlighting that his life of crime, like he was spent like 20-something years in prison because he was abused at 16. In order to abuse him, the people force-fed him heroin, and so he got hooked on heroin, and then he was committing crimes in order to feed his addiction because of what happened to him, and he spent about $400,000 on rehab after he got out of not just like drug rehab but psychological treatment, inpatient treatment to try and get over his demons. And people on Centrelink that can't afford anything, like they're getting 6 free psychological sessions a year, and if they've experienced trauma like that, that's not going to put a chip in or a dent in.
Not even close.
No, and so the National Redress Scheme is costing the Australian taxpayer billions, but that ends in 2027, and then what's going to happen? The only way people can get redress is to sue and to at least get recognition and be able to afford to go see doctors and knowing they're never going to work, but at least be able to have money to live. Like I've had people that have gone without food to get their medication because if they don't take their medication, they can't function during the day. They can't get out of bed. It's the most insidious crime, but its impact on people it's just devastating.
I likened it to guys going to war and coming back with PTSD.
Yeah,
that's how serious I look at it. Guys, mates of mine that have, some of them just have mental blanks. I was sitting with a guy a couple of weeks ago, episode 33, Corey Neal. If anyone wants to go back and listen to it, when we're having a conversation, his mind would just blank. Because he has all these, other images come in his head of kids, that he had to patch up over in Afghan and mates died over in Afghan. So he would just completely stop and be like, hey, what are we talking about? Can you remind me? Right. And I liken it to sexual abuse, child sexual abuse victims, the same type of PTSD that they would have. Now, a lot of people might be like, oh, that's not true, but no way. No way. I'd much rather go to war than be abused at home by fucking some weirdo.
The thing with war is you kind of know what you expect when you go there. Right, like they would train you in a certain way to say this is what's going to happen over there. But if you're a 4-year-old and you wake up and you've been raped, like you don't know how to do that. And
right.
People think, with these offenders, offending, it's a 12-year-old. This is full-blown sexual abuse of a 1-year-old, of a 3-year-old, of a 4-year-old, where in later life, many young women abused need reconstructive surgery to fix what's happened to them. I've had girls that have had hip issues because they're forced at 2 or 3 years old, they've forced the hips apart, and they grow with bad hips, and you think, how can someone do that to a child? And unfortunately, it's more than likely to happen in your house than anywhere else.
We need to bring back capital punishment.
Yeah, I think that's probably the only crime. Again, it's the only crime that has no legal justification. And it's not like American legal system, how you have one guy's sentenced for 30 years for that and 40 years for that, and they get 1,000 years in prison. What you'll see here is that there'll be sentences running concurrently where they'll say, right, you've got 13 charges where you've pled guilty, each one of them 6 years, so you get 6 years.
Yeah,
it's not like 13 times 6.
Yeah, that's really sad, and it's really sad to know that these people can just do that and get minimal time, like 6 years, right? Well, and they've offended, say they've offended 6 people.
It's because they negotiate down, because people bank on the fact that the victim survivor won't be strong enough to actually give evidence at trial.
Yeah.
And so usually with a victim survivor, the actual evidence giving evidence can be more traumatic than the actual event itself.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
They're basically cross-examined and not believed. But when it's the civil side, is that offender, they have to participate. The tables turn, and you see some of these guys get cross-examined and they will absolutely wilt into a ball. And I've had guys before that they've been confronted with it, and they simply they don't deny it. They just go, if someone called you and said, hey, you raped a 2-year-old, you'd be like, what? You got the wrong number. Where some of these guys are, I'd love to know more about the alleged offending.
Yeah. And
right away, you're just like, you are sick. You're
disgusting. Sick. Yeah. Mate, there's a special place in hell for those guys. There is. There really is, mate. And like I said before, if this, like for me personally, if this ever happened to anyone around me, I'd be wearing an orange jumpsuit for the rest of my life. Like I'll just take it into my own hands. I wouldn't be able to control myself.
And with these prisons, like you seeing these guys being put in protective custody, and because they go, right, well, if I get caught, I'll just go back, I have my tea and biscuits, and I'll watch TV with other sex offenders, and we won't get hurt. And it's like, well,
they'll probably trade stories with each other.
Yeah, well, what they do, they trade stories, they tell each other how to hide assets, they talk about websites and connections and things like that. But I think you'll see a lot of reduced offending if these guys are actually placed in general pop.
Yeah.
And actually, go to prison, not just go to the country clubs in Mount Gambier where it's all old people that do this. Like you think it's the coward crime. You put any of these guys in prison and see how long they last.
Yeah, I've had a few military mates that have been in that world, not the child world, but the
prison world.
Yeah. Let's say that they've been around that sort of world, and mate, they say that anyone will get heavy attraction from the rest of the inmates if they are like a pedophile. But the one thing is, and they can work around the system, is they can get out of that inmate world and they can go to their own little special prison, which is just, to me, mate, that is just wild that we let that happen as a society and also from a government point of view.
There was one, the Jad Brooker I talked about before, he ran like a pedophile syndicate. There was one guy that got, he was a Labor minister advisor. He got 6 months suspended sentence. Don't do it again. How dare you? But there was another guy that was abusing children. He was recording them in the shower as well. And he was a former prison guard. And part of his sentencing was, I can't go to prison. I'll be a target. I'll be attacked. And it was actually the Department of Corrections said, no, but you can go to prison. We'll make sure you're protected. But, waving the white flag and being cowards at the end of it. And usually what happens, offenders will plead their innocence right until up to a trial. And a lot of times they're backflip right before a trial. But by that time, they've lost their discounting sentence. So if you plead guilty as early as possible, you're entitled to a 25% reduction in guilt, which it's beneficial because it doesn't put the victim survivor through the rigours of a trial, which can often last 2 or 3 years from the date of arrest. But you're still seeing people plead guilty to 1 or 2 crimes out of hundreds, which they can successfully mitigate them and downgrade it. But still, again, you need to do something at the start to prevent it happening. If you, I spoke before about COVID, like home detention is exactly like what we did through COVID. Only leave your house for medical appointments and shopping. That's it. And you can sit at home, watch Netflix, do whatever you want. Work out at home, have your friends over. It's not a deterrent.
Yeah, that's absolutely disgusting, and it's just what also as well. When they go to these prisons, and then they can also go to like the safe part of prison, is that like they can go in with an apprentice in sexual abuse, but they come out with a doctorate in pedophilia.
Yeah,
because they learn from these other guys. What website should I use? How do I not get caught? And it's just a information cesspool.
And one of the big things is, I think I touched on it before, where they'd say, look, there's a mother in a suburb that's addicted to methamphetamine that's got 3 kids under 10, and go and give her $50 and she'll let you go lock in a room with one of her children. And it's even the people that broker it, they should be getting the sentence as well. And same, I had someone a while ago said to me that exploitation material, anyone in possession of it should be charged with accessory after the fact.
Yeah. Not
the person actually taking it, because one image could be shared millions of times.
Definitely.
And so I've always believed there should be a staggered system for exploitation material, where if you have 100 photos, it's 3 months minimum. If you have 1,000, it's 6 months minimum, and so on, because it's and I feel bad for the police officers that have to go through these images and be like, well, okay, well, that's graphic, that's related to this, and the human toll on it. And I get a lot of media attention on this, but it should all be like there's an officer called Jacket in South Australia. It's a joint anti-child I don't know what it actually stands for, but they're all the ones that when you see there's an arrest of a syndicate member or a pedophile ring, they're the ones behind it. And like the FBI found Shannon McCall, who was the family's SA worker that was abusing children for years, and they actually found it because one of the photos they had with him, I think it was in somewhere in America, though, the FBI was actually looking for him, and he had a little birthmark right inside his hand here, and they actually tracked a lot of the abuse material from that birthmark alone.
Wow.
And it's guys like McGill Training Centre's was around the corner from here, and that was a child youth centre where everyone that went in there for years was abused by the guards, and the guards had their own nicknames, and they ran a pedophile ring where they'd abuse children every night. And it got to the point where in 2009 a member from the United Nations travelled to Adelaide just to see the McGill Training Centre and said, shut this place down right now.
Wow.
And it wasn't shut down until 3 years later.
Man, I was going to school across the road at Ross Trevor when that was happening. Wow.
And so I haven't met one person that's been in McGill that wasn't subject to abuse. And this centre was open for years. And
where are these guards now? Are they?
Some guards are still working in corrections.
No way.
In other centres around Australia that house children and vulnerable people.
How the fuck did we let this happen?
And so what was happening is all the guards would use their fake names around these children, so they can't say, it was this guy. But now, finally, after all these years, there's been a task force set up by the police that's actually looking into all these guards.
Good.
And you think these guards were doing it on a daily basis to anyone that came in, and what they were doing is they were abusing them and then following them home afterwards and threatening them. And so it's when they are finally arrested and named, it's going to be a very, very big eye-opening experience for people in South Australia, because there's going to be floodgates of all people coming forward saying that happened to me.
And so they should. And so they should come forward.
And the best thing about...
Take their supers, take everything you can from them.
With McGill, it was run by the state government. It's going to be the state government's going to be up for this, because it's these guards were known to each other for doing it. And the fact that, if the United Nations had come to Australia, there must have been a complaint somewhere.
Well, there must have been quite a few.
Yeah, and so it's a lot of these people are going to finally get taken down.
Yeah.
And it's going to be all these people that have been suffering in silence for decades finally going, right, this happened to me. And the thing with McGill is, and all other institutions where people have gone to, it's not like someone abused by their grandfather a date years ago. Some of these people were only in McGill for a weekend. And you think when you get notes from a centre like that, you can pinpoint the exact dates where someone was in there, and all of them would always say it was first night it happened to me, second night it happened to me. You can pinpoint exactly the dates, the person, and I think anyone arrested under McGill will most likely wave the white flag right away, because they will never see light of day again if they go to trial and they're found guilty. They're just going to plead guilty as early as possible and try and hope they get out before they die.
Wow. Mate, that is incredible to know that happened in Adelaide in the early 2000s, especially when I was going to school right across the road. I was at Ross Trevor from I joined 2009 in the military, so from 04 to 08 I was there. So that would have been in the height of it probably.
Yep, and that centre was open for years, and people doing the same thing. And it's, the weirdest thing is during COVID, all these conspiracy theories come out about, elites running pedophile rings and things like that. Like, apart from you about Epstein, I've been around this field for years, and I've never heard judges, politicians involved in this area. It's like I said before, it's
just your average male,
average neighbour that's and I'm not saying all scout leaders or coaches are like that, but it's they get a bad rap because a lot of offenders go through there, and it's just a mindful thing for parents just to be on the watch out. And if your child changes attitude on something immediately, warning sign.
Yeah.
If you and one thing that's weird at the moment is with social media, they're actually offenders are weaponizing it. So, for instance,
I was just about to talk to you about this. So yeah,
there's a game called Roblox where there was a chat room where offenders were actually talking about explicit material, and what would happen is they try and befriend children in the same state as them, and then they'd say to a child on the chat, "Hey, add me on Snapchat." And what they would do is they keep messaging the child during the day. And if they go, "Oh, actually, hey, I'm playing now. I'm at home today," they'd say, "Oh, what are you actually doing?" "Oh, I'm home sick today." "Is anyone home?" "No, they're not." add me on Snapchat. Now, a default setting on Snapchat is location services. So if you don't turn that off, you can find where someone is within half a meter of where they are sitting.
Wow.
And so if you go into Snapchat, there's on the left-hand side, there's a little like pin that you drop for when you're doing maps. If you press on that, I'll show you off air, but if you press on that, mine's turned off, but I can show you where a friend of mine is right now within half a meter. It'll show their battery percentage. And so what offenders are doing is they'll message a child, they rock up at their house, they'll abuse them, and they'll say, I know where you live. If you tell anyone what happened, I'm going to come back, I'm going to kill your parents, I'm going to harm you. And so parents need to be vigilant, especially who they're talking to. And if you got a child with Snapchat or anything like that, with location services on, turn it off.
Yeah, this is a discussion I have with friends and military guys as well. Like, you see all my military mates, none of them really have their kids on social media at all, right? Because like they know the risks that are out there. Then you get families that haven't been involved in that world, right? Then they're just happily living in Adelaide. They've never had any of that type of stuff, or they don't know what's out there, and they will frequently be posting their kids online. Do you think that's a good idea, or
one of the big? I mean, you can post your kids online; it's up to you. But one of the big thing is remove identifying factors. So if you've got a child that you're sharing a first day of school picture, for instance, I would prefer with people is if you, instead of putting your kid in a uniform before, take a photo at home and just normal clothes and just say, first day of school. Because what would happen if if you know someone that's an offender, they can go to that school and say, hi, I'm hi, little Bobby, I'm friends with your parents. I know your dog called Spot, and they can't come get you today, or can you come with me? Anything to identify your children. Like I put nothing about my kids on social media. I've had stalkers, I've had threats. But the funny thing with the threats are, in a past life, I was a training partner for a professional MMA fighter. So there's not too many people out there that know what they do. And so, I mean, my funny thing is people that threaten me, I'm just like, oh, well, sex offenders hate me. So so be it. But
I would love to be hated by the group, to be honest.
But it's not the kind of thing where you want to take steps to limiting danger to your children. So don't put up identifying things about schools. Put up sports uniforms, but block out the logo.
Yep.
But it's just be vigilant. Like I'm going to get my kids when they're older the watches that you can track them. And I mean, just like if my kids have social media, I think the age in South Australia have to be 13 at the moment.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm going to teach my kids martial arts and take them to classes like that, because one of the big things about that is not about how to protect yourself at school. Is if you get kidnapped, scratch, claw, bite, all this stuff, cause commotion, and it's we just need to protect our kids, but it falls to our parents as well, because there's only a certain level of things the children can do. And if parents are sitting around knowing about how bad it is in South Australia, then the best thing to do is go into your electorate. Like we did start a petition in 2021 about the law change, and we're up to about 57,000 signatures at the moment, and normally you only need 10,000 for the government to consider something. And we're like, you've got 50
5 times what we normally need.
Yeah, and you've got people like, I've never been on an interview on TV, radio, podcast where someone goes, gee, that super change is a terrible idea.
Yeah, that's right. It is like the one of the things that we need to put in place, and not that we should have to do this, or not that you should have to do this as well. Like, people should just fucking not do it, because it is against defenseless kids.
Well, one thing I didn't realise is a friend of a friend owned an establishment for gentlemen, and when you're watching movies as a kid, you saw Pretty Woman, you think it'd be like thousands and thousands of dollars for someone to see a sex worker. But it's not even $100 for some places. And you look at places like, I think it's the Netherlands, where after it's either 7 or 8 p.m. on weeknights, they have movies that contain full frontal nudity. And the sexual abuse rates in that country is low, because that material is available for adults when the children go to bed. And there's all there's online websites people can use, but the thing with offending against a child, which is nowhere near mainstream sexual relations, is mainly based on narcissism and domination. They want to feel like they're in power. Like, it's a lot of females that abused as children turn to sex work because they can actually flip the narrative, because they can say, right, I can control this act. You pay this money, you go to this place, and you listen to what I say. And it's restoring their agency by saying, this is me now taking agency back over my body. I can say what I want to happen. But the only way that you would abuse a child is to basically try to control them, and then it's all the manipulation factors afterwards. Like, people bribe children, they convince them it's fine, don't tell anyone, this is our secret. And one of the big ones is, if you tell anyone, we'll both go to jail.
Yeah.
And so you've got these kids that are abused, and they're petrified of talking because they think that they're in the wrong. And I've always used this example, and people think it's completely off topic, but whenever I see anyone that's been abused as a child, if they see their offender, they still picture themselves as that 5-year-old, as that 6-year-old.
Yeah.
And I always tell people, when I can see their eyes, something like that, I took my son to a oval where I used to play cricket in primary school. And I remember back, I was 10 or so, I remember playing cricket and going, like, when you're 10, no one can hit the ball further than 5 meters. So I'd always think, God, you must be, the strongest person in the world to hit a 4 on this oval. And I was walking the soccer, and I had a soccer ball in my hand, and I was walking past the pitch. I could underarm the ball from the pitch to the boundary almost on the full. And so I'm, 38 years old now, and looking back at 10-year-old, I'm like, that felt forever. And people think that something when they're younger is that much bigger than what they are. Like, if you're a 4-year-old abused by an adult, if the adult's 5'5" and you're 4 years old, you're going to think that person is way bigger than you. But when you grow up, I've seen guys that are 6'5", 6'6", petrified of seeing a withered up old man.
Yeah,
and it's because in their head, they're still, that guy abused me, that guy threatened me, that guy was going to harm me.
Probably as well, mate. They're probably still living in that moment. Like they probably haven't left that moment.
And
which
it's
is sad.
once they take the power back, and say a lot of people abuse at churches and schools, the offenders are all dead most of the time. And what schools do now, which is great, is they actually offer a letter of apology on top of the compensation. And the apology means more to almost everyone than the money itself. Because finally, after all these years, they've had this backpack of trauma they've kept secret, and they've let it impact every facet of their life, and they're finally getting acknowledgement for what happened to them.
Yeah, mate. I had someone explain it to me perfectly when we were overseas in Afghanistan. We had a bad incident over there where we had 3 guys got shot on one night, and I was interviewing one of the guys that was there the next day. Went to go see the boys, and mate, he said it that he sort of got out of the car. The guys were leaning up against a HESCO wall, which was the boundary of the wall for the FOB, which is a forward operating base, which we work out of. And he was like, mate, you just looked at them and they just gave you that 1,000-yard stare. And what he said to me was like they were dead inside, but they were it just looks like they were just stopped, or they were staying in that. They stood still in that time. In that Pacific time where they were overseas. And he goes, mate, honestly, I think most of them guys are still there. And they're still in that moment when it can relate exactly to what we're talking about now. Like these people that are getting abused, and they're seeing this old man, and they're just so petrified of him, probably because they're still caught in that moment from when they got abused when they were younger.
I mean, look at, for instance, the Grammys was yesterday, and there's a photo on the front page of 9MSN where Beyonce won an award, I don't know what it was, and then Taylor Swift and Jay-Z are cheersing champagne glasses to one another. It's like he's being sued at the moment for allegations of sexually abusing a 13-year-old.
Yeah, it's disgusting, isn't it?
It's just weird. Like you and I have got plenty of mates that have drink driven or gotten a punch on at a pub or done something stupid. But, they're your mates. You'd sit down and have a chat with them. But I don't know anyone that would sit down with anyone that's facing any charges pertaining to the sexual abuse of a child. Well,
mate, it's probably, to be honest, whoever went to them PDD parties like that. Unfortunately, that was most of Hollywood, and there were, there's some stuff coming out now that there were 9-year-old kids that had come up against that, and man, it just, Hollywood still just goes around in its crazy circles saying that, they're the moral values of the world, and look at us, we're the best. When realistically, man, I would love to see this Diddy 5s come out.
Look at Roman Polanski, for instance. Like all these actors that are starring in his movies now for years are praising him as being a genius, but he actually skipped. I think he moved to Romania or somewhere. He was abusing children in the States, and then he nicked off, and he's not come back because he's going to get arrested the second time. Look at Woody Allen, for instance. Woody Allen married his former stepdaughter that he adopted when she was like 3 or 4 years old, married her when she was 18 years old.
Yeah, wow.
Like you'd think if you married someone at such a tender age, something was going on, and it's all these people that say, such talent, but in real world, if anyone is known to have abused someone, they're not getting invited anywhere. They're not getting, celebrated. There's a library in Hilton in South Australia here. So I've sued a school that's got a teacher called Stephen Hammer. I sued the school multiple times because he was abusing children the whole way through. Now, my mother-in-law a while ago called me, and she was with my oldest son. And I'm like, where are you guys? She goes, I'm at the Stephen Hammer Library. I'm like, what?
Yeah, you mentioned that, didn't you? Wow, they named the library after him.
Stephen Hammer was the mayor of West Torrens for about 30-odd years, and his son, Stephen Hammer Jr., was one of the worst, if not the worst, sex offenders this state has ever seen. And now there's a library named the Stephen Hammer Library, and even though it's not affiliated with the father, still the name, it's like having the Jeffrey Epstein Jr. library or something like that. It's not associated with him. It's such a terrible optics by the council, and the fact that name hasn't been changed. I've already started the steps to try and get people to make that library change, because you shouldn't have a name like that celebrated or remembered.
Correct.
And with Hammer Jr., he was actually billeting footballers at the West Adelaide Football Club for 30 years. The whole time he was abusing children at school. And you just imagine the prime target of this would be kids from a remote country region coming to Adelaide, being abused and being threatened if they ever say anything, because everyone knows someone from the country. It's you fix it with duct tape and don't ask, don't tell, and so you've got all these people that are just chomping at the bits to come forward, but they just don't have the time. And I don't care if people stand next to me or behind me, as long as they support this cause, then it's going to change, and we're going to make Australia one of the worst places in the world to offend against children.
Yeah, and that has to be the end goal. And look, mate, we'll start to wrap this up now. But just the information that you've come out and told me, what will be really interesting, mate, to see how your shorts go on social media. Because I have some that have the potential to get to hundreds of thousands of shorts. So, what I do, like the one bit of information that I want to give out there is, if you do see a short of this in the coming weeks coming up, please jump onto my social media, please share it, and please let people know that this is happening, because we can't, or you can't fight this alone. You need the public behind you, and we need to get this situation aired out, and we need to let the public know that this is happening. And unfortunately, I've seen the worst of it happen in different countries, but to know what's happening here is it's absolutely disgusting, and yeah, it's really tough. And that was probably a tough podcast for people to listen to as well. But like I said, we need to have these tough discussions, and they need to be aired out into the public. So, look, mate, I finish my podcast off with a guess or a question that I ask everyone. So it's if you could give your 18-year-old self one bit of advice about life, what would it be?
Always bet on yourself. So I was an accountant when I was 21, 22 and hated it, and all my friends getting cars and going on holidays, I was like, you know what, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. So bet on myself and go back. I had a friend now that was doing owned his personal training business and went to work in a corporate job and hated it and wanted to be a teacher. And I said to him, mate, bet on yourself. Like, if that's what you want to do, there's no point regretting what you do, because you spend more time with people at work than you do with your family most times. So bet on yourself, and always stay true to your own values. Like, never compromise for anything. Mate,
that was a really good podcast, and a really good answer to that question as well. But look, mate, Andrew Carpenter, thank you very much for coming in to World's Collide podcast. And I just want to have a message out to everyone as well. I know this was tough to listen to, but again, we do need to have these conversations. So thank you very much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe. And for more information, head over to our Instagram at 2 Worlds Collide Podcast. Take care.